She ran her child to the ER. The doctor was her ex and her son's father. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Emily was in a panic. Her heart was racing as she held her son, Daniel, close to her chest, trying to soothe him as his breathing became shallow. The faint cry from him had caught her completely off guard. What started as a mild fever had escalated too quickly, and now, Emily wasn't sure what was going on. She knew she had to act fast. There was no time to waste. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her phone, dialing the emergency services. "Please, hurry," she muttered to herself, barely able to keep it together. Daniel's condition was worsening. Emily knew the hospital was just a few minutes away, but the dread gnawing at her stomach told her that time was slipping away. As she waited anxiously for the ambulance, she looked at Daniel, her thoughts racing back to the last few days, the arguments, the uncertainty, the guilt. Her mind wasn't on the current crisis. It was back to the last time she had seen Dr. David, her ex, and the father of her son. Emily had never expected to see him again, certainly not under these circumstances. Their relationship had ended painfully, filled with bitterness, misunderstandings, and the responsibility of raising Daniel together but apart. It had been years since they parted ways, but Emily hadn't forgotten the strain it had put on her life. Daniel, only 5, was the light of her life, and though they co-parented, things were always tense between her and David. When Emily had walked into the ER, she had been focused on one thing, getting help for Daniel. But when the nurse led her into a room, and she saw him there, Dr. David, the shock hit her like a wave. It was as if time had stopped. For a brief moment, Emily felt everything inside her freeze. She had to force herself to look away from him and focus on Daniel. She quickly tried to assess the situation, but David's presence made it impossible to stay calm. Her heart pounded. She had always known that there was a possibility of running into him at some point, but the universe had chosen today, of all days. She was trapped in this overwhelming moment of fear and confusion. David, ever the professional, seemed unaffected. He asked her questions, his voice steady as he checked Daniel over. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that things were far more complicated than just an ER visit. There was so much left unsaid between them, and now, with their son in the room, it felt impossible to ignore. David glanced at Emily as he took care of Daniel. For a split second, their eyes met, and she saw something she hadn't expected: vulnerability. He seemed to be struggling with his own emotions, just as she was. But there was no time to talk. The situation with Daniel demanded their full attention. Emily focused on him, silently pleading with the universe for her son's safety. The tension in the room was palpable. Neither of them spoke about their past, their painful breakup, or the years of distance between them. It was as if time had erased all of that, leaving them with nothing but the present moment and the one thing that truly mattered: their child. As David continued to assess Daniel, Emily stayed silent, her mind in a whirlwind of memories, questions, and emotions. Could they really get through this together? Would she be able to trust him again? Would he even want to help, knowing the history between them? She didn't know the answers. But for now, all she could do was hope that they could both be the parents Daniel needed in this moment. Emily stood in the sterile, white hospital room, trying to keep her composure. Daniel was resting on the examination table, his small body still and vulnerable, his chest rising and falling slowly. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound breaking the tense silence between her and David. She was struggling to focus. Her eyes flicked back and forth between her son and the man who had once been her everything. David was moving quickly, efficiently, but Emily could feel the tension in the air. She wasn't sure what was worse: the fear for Daniel's well-being or the emotions she had to keep locked away while standing in the same room as David. She watched as he adjusted the 4-line and took Daniel's temperature. She had been through this process many times before, but today it felt like the world was crashing in around her. "He's stable for now," David said, his voice calm, but with an underlying edge that betrayed his concern. Emily nodded, her eyes not leaving Daniel's face. "Thank you," she said softly, but it felt hollow. There was no sincerity in the words, only exhaustion and a deep ache. It wasn't just about Daniel's health, it was everything. The years that had passed, the bitterness that still lingered between them, the broken pieces of a relationship that never quite healed. "You're doing great, Emily," David added, but his words didn't quite match the tension she could feel in his posture. He was trying to offer comfort, but Emily wasn't sure if she was ready to accept any from him. "I just need him to be okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't lose him." David stopped in his tracks, the weight of her words hitting him like a punch to the gut. He had been through so much with Emily, but nothing had prepared him for this. Seeing her so vulnerable, so raw, brought back memories of the life they had shared. He knew their relationship had ended, but part of him had never fully let go. He looked down at Daniel, then back at Emily. He didn't know what to say. The silence between them was deafening. It had always been easier to hide behind the walls they had built up over the years, but now, in this moment, those walls felt like they were closing in on him. "He's going to be fine," he said finally, trying to reassure her. It wasn't a promise, but more of a hope. Emily didn't respond. She didn't know if she could believe him. Her mind was clouded with doubt, but she couldn't show it. Not in front of him. Not in front of Daniel. David took a step closer to her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of the woman he once knew. But Emily wasn't the same person she had been when they first met. She had changed. Life had changed her. And now, standing in this hospital room, surrounded by memories and emotions that she had buried for so long, she realized just how much. She had tried to convince herself that she didn't need him, that she could handle everything on her own. But now, in this moment, she was terrified. Terrified for her son, for herself, and for the future. She swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I never wanted this," she said quietly, more to herself than to David. He glanced at her, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" he asked gently, but Emily shook her head, not ready to go there. "Nothing," she muttered. It didn't matter. What mattered now was Daniel. As much as they both tried to avoid it, the truth was undeniable. Their lives were intertwined through their son. Their history, their pain, all of it was connected to this one tiny person who needed both of them. And for a brief moment, Emily wondered if they could somehow put aside their differences for Daniel's sake. Could they be the parents he deserved? Could they somehow find a way to work together again, even after everything that had happened? The thought scared her. She wasn't sure she was ready to trust him again, but at that moment, she didn't have a choice. "Thank you for being here," she said, her voice soft but sincere. David nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course," he replied. But Emily could see the flicker of emotion in his eyes. For a moment, it was as if they were back in time, when things had been simpler. But reality set in quickly, and Emily knew they couldn't go back. Not now. Not ever. Emily's eyes stayed glued to Daniel, who was now resting quietly, his fever subsiding under the cool compress David had placed on his forehead. The room had grown quieter, the steady beep of the heart monitor a reminder of how fragile life could be. She could feel the tension still hanging in the air between her and David, but for the moment, she pushed it aside. Daniel's health was the only thing that mattered now. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. David was working quickly, updating the medical chart and making sure Daniel had everything he needed. Emily watched him, her mind racing. She knew she had to say something, address the years of silence, but the words seemed impossible to find. "How is he?" she asked, her voice small but full of concern. David glanced up from his work, his brow furrowing slightly. "He's stable," he replied, "but we'll need to monitor him for a while to make sure the fever doesn't spike again. It looks like a viral infection, but we'll know more after the tests come back." Emily nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. The uncertainty, the waiting, it was all too familiar. The fear she'd been holding back threatened to spill over. She took another slow breath, trying to stay composed. "Thank you," she said quietly, her gratitude genuine but tinged with a sense of sadness. She wasn't sure if she was thanking him for his medical expertise or for being here at all. David gave a small nod, but his expression remained unreadable. He seemed to be holding something back, something more than just the professionalism he was trying to maintain. Emily could see it in his eyes, the struggle to keep his emotions in check. He had always been good at hiding his feelings, especially when it came to her. The silence stretched on, neither of them knowing how to bridge the gap between them. Emily felt her frustration building. She hated this awkwardness, this chasm of unspoken words. "You didn't have to come," she blurted out, the words slipping before she could stop them. "I know we're not together anymore, but you didn't have to." David's eyes met hers then, sharp and direct. "I didn't come because of us," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I came because of Daniel. He's my son too, Emily. You know that." The words stung more than she expected. Of course, she knew. But hearing him say it out loud in this context, in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, made it all too real. She looked away, her eyes finding the small, colorful posters on the walls of the room, anything to avoid his gaze. "I know," she whispered. It's hard. I don't know what to do with all of this. With you. With everything." David didn't respond immediately. He seemed to weigh her words, taking a deep breath. "I know. And I'm sorry for how things ended," he said quietly. "But right now, it's not about us, Emily. It's about him. It's always been about him." Emily nodded again, the tightness in her chest easing just a fraction. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words until now. It was strange, this awkward dance they were doing, acknowledging the past while trying to focus on the present. The truth was, she had always hoped things would be different. She had hoped that one day, they could find a way to co-parent peacefully, to raise Daniel together, even if it meant being in the same room without all the baggage. But that was easier said than done. The years of unresolved tension and hurt couldn't be wiped away just like that. As much as Emily wanted to move past it all, she wasn't sure she was ready. "Not yet. I know you're right," she said softly, her voice shaking a little. "It's just, I don't know if I can forgive everything that happened. I don't know if I can trust you again." There it was, the raw truth. David stayed silent for a moment, letting the words hang in the air between them. He looked at her, his expression softening just slightly. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now," he said, his voice lower. "I'm just asking you to trust me with him. That's all I want." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his request settle on her shoulders. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But trust was a fragile thing, and it didn't come back overnight. She opened her eyes and met his gaze again. "I'll try," she said quietly. "For him. I'll try." David nodded, a look of relief crossing his face, but there was still something unsaid between them. The silence was heavy, but it felt a little less suffocating now. They had a long way to go before things could be fixed between them. But for the first time in years, Emily felt a flicker of hope that they might actually get there, for Daniel's sake. Emily watched as David finished his last check on Daniel. His breathing had steadied, and the color had returned to his cheeks. The fever was gone, but the worry in Emily's heart hadn't quite lifted. She knew her son was in good hands, but seeing David again had stirred so many emotions. She couldn't shake the feeling that things between them were still unfinished. Daniel was finally asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling rhythmically, and Emily took a seat in the corner of the room. She tried to push aside the exhaustion that was creeping in, but her mind was buzzing. David, meanwhile, was quietly reviewing the medical charts, making notes. He seemed focused, but Emily could tell he was aware of her presence, his glances lingering a little too long whenever he thought she wasn't looking. "How long will he need to stay here?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. David looked up, his gaze softening. "He should be good to go in a few hours, but we'll monitor him. If anything changes, we'll need to act quickly, but it seems like his body is handling it well." Emily nodded, her fingers twitching in her lap. "Thank you," she said quietly, but the words felt hollow. She couldn't help it. Her mind kept returning to the past, the days before everything fell apart. "I should have brought him in sooner," she muttered, her thoughts running in circles. David raised an eyebrow. "You did everything you could," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "You're a great mom, Emily. Don't second-guess yourself." She looked up at him then, meeting his eyes. There was sincerity there, and for a brief moment, it felt like they had returned to some version of themselves that wasn't clouded by bitterness. Emily had always known that David cared for their son, but hearing it from him now, after all these years, made her heart twist in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't sure if she could trust him again, but in that moment, she could see that maybe, just maybe, they could work together. "I don't know if I'm ready to trust you again," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. David didn't flinch. Instead, he met her gaze with a kind of understanding that she hadn't expected. I get it, he said quietly. I'm not asking you to. I just need you to trust me when it comes to him. That's all. Emily swallowed, the lump in her throat making it hard to speak. She wanted to argue, to push back, but the truth was, she had been doing this alone for so long. She had been so focused on not needing anyone, especially not David, that she hadn't realized how much. She missed having someone who understood. I'm trying, she said, finally managing to speak. For him. I'm trying. David nodded, and for a moment, they both just stood there, looking at Daniel, who was now resting peacefully in his sleep. Emily felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. It wasn't just for David's help tonight, though that was more than she could have hoped for. It was for the small glimmer of hope that they might be able to put aside their past, to raise their son together in a way that was healthy for all of them. He's lucky to have you, David said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Emily felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had always wondered if she was enough for Daniel, if she could give him the life he deserved. But hearing David say that, hearing him acknowledge what she had been doing all on her own, made her feel like maybe she was doing something right. I'm just trying to do what's best for him, Emily replied, her voice soft. I always have. David looked at her then, his expression softening. I know, and I'll do everything I can to make sure we're both there for him, no matter what. The air between them had shifted, the tension not entirely gone but eased. Emily wasn't sure where this would go, if they could ever really fix things, but for now, she didn't need answers. All she needed was to know that Daniel was going to be okay. And, for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe they could figure the rest out together, for his sake. The room was still, save for the soft whir of the air conditioning and the rhythmic sound of Daniel's breathing. Emily sat quietly by his side, her eyes never leaving him. It had been hours since they first arrived, and while Daniel was showing signs of improvement, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered. She glanced over at David, who was now sitting at the desk, reviewing some paperwork. Despite the calm on the surface, Emily could sense the undercurrent of unspoken thoughts between them. There was still so much left unsaid. Is he really okay? She asked quietly, her voice almost lost in the silence. David looked up from the papers, his brow furrowing. Slightly. I think so, he said, his tone reassuring but still guarded. His fever's gone, and his oxygen levels are stable. We'll keep him here a little longer to make sure, but he's on the mend. Emily nodded, but her anxiety didn't quite dissipate. It wasn't just about Daniel. It was about everything. The past, the present, the uncertainty of what would happen next. She wanted to believe David. She wanted to trust that things would be okay, that they could work together for Daniel. But the walls they had built over the years were not so easily torn down. David stood up from his chair and walked over to the window, glancing out at the city below. Emily watched him, wondering what was going through his mind. She had always known him to be a man of few words, someone who internalized his thoughts. And now, after everything, he still seemed so closed off, so distant. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. Finally, David spoke. I don't want you to think that I'm just doing this because it's what's expected of me. I'm not trying to fix everything between us, but I care about Daniel, and I care about you. I know we've had our differences, but I'm not going to walk away when you need me. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. His words were simple, but they hit her harder than she expected. She had always wondered if David would ever be truly present in their son's life. She had always wondered if he would come back when it really mattered. And now, here he was, offering his help, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely cared. It wasn't easy for her to accept that. She had spent so many years convincing herself that she could do it all on her own, that she didn't need him. But now, with Daniel lying there in front of her, she realized how much of an impossible task that had been. I know, she said, her voice soft but firm. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to trust again. David's expression softened, and for the first time that night, there was no trace of the tension that had clouded their interactions earlier. He took a step closer to her, not in a way that was overly intimate, but with an understanding that made her feel seen. It's okay, he said quietly. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to be there for him. A chance to show you that I'm not going anywhere. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to open herself up again. She wasn't sure if she was ready to forgive everything that had happened between them. But she knew one thing for certain. For Daniel's sake, they had to try. "I'm trying," she whispered. "For him, I'm trying." David gave a small nod, his eyes softening as he took a step back. "That's all I need to hear," he said. The room grew quieter again as they both settled into an unspoken understanding. There were still so many things left unresolved between them. There were still years of hurt and misunderstandings that would take time to heal. But as Emily sat there, watching Daniel sleep peacefully, she realized that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward. For Daniel's sake. The road ahead would be long, and it wouldn't be easy. But as long as they both tried, they could figure it out. One step at a time. The night seemed to drag on, the hours blurring together as Emily sat quietly beside Daniel's bed, her thoughts spinning. Despite the calm that had settled over the hospital room, there was an unease she couldn't shake. David was still there, but the two of them had barely exchanged a word since their last conversation. It was as if they were both treading carefully, unsure of where to go next. Emily's mind wandered back to their past, the times when they had been a family, when things felt simple and full of hope. But those days were long gone, replaced by the complexities of life, hurt, and distance. As much as she tried to push those thoughts aside, they kept creeping in, threatening to overshadow the present moment. Daniel stirred in his sleep, his small hand twitching slightly. Emily instinctively reached out to adjust the blanket around him, her fingers brushing against his warm skin. She could feel the weight of everything that had led her to this point. Her fear for Daniel, her unresolved feelings toward David, the uncertainty of what the future would bring. She couldn't ignore it any longer. "David," she finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. He looked up from the chair where he had been sitting, his gaze meeting hers. "I don't know what we're doing," she said, her heart heavy with the question that had been plaguing her since their reunion tonight. "I don't know how to make this work. How to make us work." David stood up slowly, walking over to where she sat. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at her as if trying to find the right words. After a moment, he spoke quietly. "I'm not asking for everything to be fixed overnight, Emily. I know that's not possible, but I'm here. For him. And if that means we have to figure out how to be around each other, even if it's hard, then I'm willing to do that." Emily closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. It was the kind of answer she had hoped for but didn't expect. She had spent so many years convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, especially not David. But tonight, in this hospital room, something had shifted. It wasn't about rekindling their relationship. It was about doing what was best for Daniel. "I just don't know how to trust again," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can let go of everything that happened between us." David nodded, his expression softening with understanding. "I get it. I'm not asking you to forget, Emily. I'm asking you to be open. Open to the possibility that things can be different now. That we can be different. For him." Emily looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. "I'm scared," she confessed, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm scared of making the wrong choice. Of getting hurt again. Of not being able to protect him the way I should." David reached out, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "You don't have to carry all of this by yourself. I'm here, Emily. And I'll always be here, for you and for him." There was a sincerity in his words that she couldn't ignore. For the first time in a long time, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could work together. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't happen overnight. But they could try. For Daniel. She looked up at him then, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. "I'll try," she said softly. "I'll try to trust you again. For him. I'll try." David gave a small nod, a flicker of relief crossing his face. They didn't need to say anything more. The unspoken understanding between them was enough. They both knew it would take time. Time to rebuild the trust, to heal the wounds that had been left behind. But in that moment, they had taken the first step. And that was all that mattered. For Daniel, they would try. Together. The quiet hum of the hospital room filled the space as Emily sat beside Daniel, who was still resting peacefully. It had been a long night, but the calm that had settled over her son's condition also brought with it a sense of stillness in Emily's heart. The whirlwind of emotions that had consumed her earlier, fear, uncertainty, old wounds, had dulled, replaced by something more elusive, the weight of possibility. David had stayed close, just within reach, but the distance between them was still palpable. They had spoken about their past, acknowledged the fractured nature of their relationship, but there was still so much unspoken between them. Emily didn't know how to begin to repair what had been broken, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. As the minutes passed, Emily's thoughts drifted back to the years before. The memories were bittersweet, good times interspersed with the cracks that had eventually torn them apart. She had been so young when they first met, so full of hope and dreams. David had been her world then, and they had built a life together. But that life had unraveled in a way that left them both scarred. She had never imagined that she would find herself in this position again, sitting across from him, sharing the responsibility of their son. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had made the decision to raise Daniel alone, to step away from the relationship that had once seemed so perfect. But now, sitting here with him, she realized how much things had changed. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to carry the weight of everything on her own. David had made his intentions clear. He wasn't asking for their old life back, for things to go back to the way they had been. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, not yet. But he was asking for a chance to do better, to be a father to Daniel in a way that mattered. And, in a way, Emily could hear the sincerity in his words. She hadn't expected him to stay so calm, so composed. It was strange, seeing him in this light, someone who had once been a partner, a lover, but now, just a man trying to do right by his son. Emily let out a long breath, the exhaustion in her bones making her shoulders sag. She didn't know what the future held, but at that moment, she didn't feel as if she was carrying the burden alone. She looked up to find David watching her, his face unreadable. "Is there anything else we need to do?" she asked, her voice softer than she had intended. David seemed to pause, then shook his head. "No, he's stable now. Just needs rest. We'll check on him again in a few hours." Emily nodded, her gaze shifting back to Daniel. There was something comforting about the steady rise and fall of his chest, the soft sound of his breath. For a moment, everything seemed simple again. But Emily knew it wasn't. She could feel the weight of their past, the years of silence and bitterness, pressing in on her chest. She wanted to believe that they could move forward, that they could co-parent, but it was difficult to imagine a future without the cracks that had already formed. The years of pain weren't something that could just be swept under the rug. And yet, Emily found herself wanting to try. For Daniel. She turned back to David, her expression hesitant. "Do you really think we can do this? Co-parent, I mean," she asked, her voice small. David didn't hesitate. "I think we can," he said simply. "It won't be easy. It's never going to be easy. But for him, we have to try. We owe him that much." Emily could feel the sincerity in his voice, and for the first time in a long time, she believed him. It wasn't a promise that everything would be perfect, but it was a promise that they would try. And for now, that was enough. They both knew the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles. They would have to navigate their past while learning to work together for Daniel's future. But for the first time, they were willing to try. For him. As the hours ticked by, Emily sat by Daniel's side, her eyes never straying far from him. He was still asleep, the steady rise and fall of his chest a comfort to her. The room was quiet, save for the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway and the soft hum of the hospital machinery. David had left for a while, to give her some space, but he had promised to return soon to check on Daniel. The solitude gave Emily time to think, time to reflect on everything that had led her to this moment. She thought about her life with David, the good times and the bad, the way they had fallen apart and the years they had spent apart, trying to move on. But here they were, back in the same space, sharing the responsibility of caring for their son. She wasn't sure what had changed, but something had shifted between them. She had felt it when they had talked earlier, that fragile thread of understanding that hadn't been there before. It wasn't a promise of everything being perfect, but it was a beginning, a small spark of hope that they could find a way to move forward. The truth was, Emily had always wanted to believe that things could work out, that they could find a way to co-parent without all the baggage that came with their past. But she had been hurt so many times before. She had spent so long convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that she could handle everything on her own. But tonight, as she sat in the dimly lit room, watching her son rest peacefully, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let someone else in. Maybe it was okay to trust again, even if it scared her. She heard the soft click of the door opening, and looked up to see David standing in the doorway. He was holding a cup of coffee, the warmth of the drink a small gesture that seemed to break the tension in the room. "How's he doing?" he asked, his voice low but filled with concern. Emily smiled faintly, grateful for the gesture. "He's doing better," she replied. "The fever's gone, and he seems to be resting more comfortably now." David nodded, setting the cup down on the small table beside her. "Good," he said simply, his eyes lingering on Daniel for a moment before meeting Emily's gaze. "You're doing a great job, you know," he added, his voice softer now. Emily felt a lump form in her throat at the unexpected compliment. She had never been one to seek validation, but hearing those words from him, after everything, felt different. "Thanks," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I just want him to be okay." "I know," David said, his tone gentle. "We both do." They were quiet for a moment, the weight of their shared responsibility settling between them. Emily knew they had a long way to go before things could be truly healed between them. The hurt was still there, buried deep, and it would take time to work through it all. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't carrying it all by herself. David was here. He was trying. And maybe that was enough. "Do you think we can really make this work?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David was silent for a long moment, as if considering her question. Then, he spoke, his words careful but sincere. "I think we can," he said. "It's not going to be easy, but we owe it to him to try. We're not the same people we were when we first met, but we can be good parents to him. We can make it work." Emily nodded slowly, her heart heavy but hopeful. She didn't have all the answers, and she knew that there would be struggles ahead. But for the first time, she felt like they could face those challenges together. For Daniel. And that was all that mattered. David gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. They both knew that their journey was far from over. But tonight, they had taken a step forward. And for now, that was enough. The following days passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Daniel was home now, recovering well, and the relief Emily had been waiting for finally started to settle in her chest. The tension in the house had lessened, though it still lingered in the corners, like a shadow they were both aware of but reluctant to acknowledge. David was around more often, helping with Daniel, and it was clear he was trying to be present, trying to make amends for the past, trying to be the father Daniel needed. But Emily still wasn't sure. Could they really make this work? Could they navigate their complicated history for the sake of their son? There were moments of quiet between them, when the weight of their shared responsibility felt almost like a distant memory. But there were also moments when the old hurt flared up, when she caught herself bracing for an argument, or worse, for him to slip away again, like he had so many times before. One evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, Emily found herself sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television. David was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. She could hear the clinking of dishes, the low hum of the faucet as he washed them. She hadn't expected to feel this, unsettled. She had wanted this, hadn't she? A chance to raise Daniel together, to give him both parents under the same roof. But now that it was happening, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. David entered the room quietly, pausing when he saw her sitting there. "Hey," he said softly, almost hesitantly. "You okay?" Emily looked up at him, startled out of her thoughts. She offered a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine." The words felt too light for the weight she was carrying inside. David sat down beside her, leaving a comfortable distance between them. "I know we're not there yet," he said, his voice low but steady. "And I'm not rushing anything. But I want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Emily's heart clenched at his words. She had heard them before, but this time felt different. It felt real. It felt like he meant it. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to do this." David turned slightly to face her, his expression serious but warm. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together. One step at a time." She nodded, though doubt still lingered. Could they really make it work? Could she allow herself to trust him again? She didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't sure when or if she would. But as she sat there with David, she realized that maybe, for the first time in a long while, she was willing to try. For Daniel's sake, for their sake. The silence that fell between them was comfortable, as if they both understood that words couldn't fix everything. They were in this together, for better or for worse. And that was enough for now. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but they were both willing to face it, side by side. Emily leaned back on the couch, her gaze drifting to the doorway, where she could see the faint outline of Daniel's room. Her heart swelled with a quiet sense of hope. It was still early, but there was a chance, just a small chance, that they could make this work. And that was enough to hold on to. For now, they would take it day by day, one step at a time.